Released in 1993, Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg and based on the novel of the same name by Michael Crichton, indelibly revolutionized blockbuster cinema as well as the realm of cinema and pop culture as we know it. And it's very apparent as to why. I may very well be preaching to the choir by making this essay video, but this is Jurassic Park we're talking about here, so perhaps one may say that some films are worth preaching to the choir about. So yeah, suffice it to say, Jurassic Park holds a very special place in my heart, but why it does so won't be the only thing that will be discussed here. For you see, some films that we watched as kids may not hold up to scrutiny to us as adults, even when we still appreciate them for shaping how we perceive the art and media which we experience. In my case, I will always appreciate a movie like Godzilla vs. Megalon as a part of my childhood, as well as the film that cemented my love for the Godzilla franchise. But at the same time, I'm still willing to recognize it as one of the weaker entries in the franchise, thus allowing me to expand my horizons to other superior entries in said franchise. However, a movie like Jurassic Park is not only a very important film for me in terms of my love and appreciation for films of its ilk, but it is also a fantastic movie overall, without nostalgia being a factor. It's a movie that holds up both in terms of its technical side of things and in terms of its storytelling. And of course, for its 30th anniversary, as of this particular recording, I figured I would make use of the occasion by doing an essay video on Jurassic Park, where I discuss how the film holds up in terms of overall quality. In case I haven't made it clear already, it holds up really well. So, with that said, hold on to your butts everybody, let's get started. Now, a brief synopsis is in order here, so that one may have an understanding of what this film is about, just in case they're in the dark on it for whatever reason. Don't worry, I'll make this segment short, sweet, and to the point, so that we can get into the meat of this film before too long. Jurassic Park is primarily set in the theme park of the same name, built by InGen CEO John Hammond, played by Richard Attenborough, on Isla Nublar. The park features dinosaurs that have been genetically recreated from blood that is extracted from prehistoric mosquitoes encased in amber. However, the park has to undergo approval before it can be opened for business. So paleontologist Dr. Alan Grant, played by Sam Neill, paleobotanist Dr. Ellie Sattler, played by Laura Dern, and chaos theorist Dr. Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum, are all brought in to inspect it. However, unbeknownst to everyone, after a bad case of corporate espionage committed by Dennis Nedry, played by Wayne Knight, causes the park to lose power, dinosaurs begin to be let loose and run amok, thus endangering its guests, which also includes Hammond's grandchildren, Tim and Lex, whom Grant must protect while the others try to get the power back on in order to call for immediate extraction. In terms of what it's about beneath the surface, Jurassic Park has a couple of key significant layers to it. I'll get into the second of these layers as we progress, but I want to get into the most important one in that regard. And that is regarding Jurassic Park being a cautionary tale of man overreaching in what it can achieve without fully and properly considering the consequences which may or will come of such achievements. John Hammond sought to bring something to the world that his fellow man can marvel at, something to see and touch, as he puts it. And it's not out of corporate greed that he does this, but rather out of a genuine motive to bring wonder and awe to the world, a sense of earnestness, if you will. As we see throughout the film, to a certain extent, he succeeded based on moments such as when his guests bear witness to a brachiosaurus, as well as when those same guests encounter a triceratops later on. However, to quote, or at least paraphrase Ian Malcolm, life cannot be contained, life breaks free, life, finds a way. Even if Hammond spared no expense, as he often proclaims, in making the park as safe as possible, with no possibility of technical faults or disgruntled employees, due to the dino's genetic makeup, which includes frog DNA that would allow them to switch genders in order to breed, dinosaurs, and by extension the power of life itself, cannot be stopped from having their natural order become rebalanced. Unfortunately, in this particular case, expenses were spared as a result of Hammond and Company overlooking what could go wrong, from dinosaurs being a bunch of no-shows during a tour, to a storm cutting the tour short, to one of the park's employees, unbeknownst to Hammond himself, basically sabotaging the entire park due to insufficient pay. So Jurassic Park in this state had no chance of running with any and all variables being taken into account. The story of Jurassic Park, in the simplest way of putting it, is a modern retelling of and exploration of themes in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a work of fiction serving as a warning of scientific innovation going wrong built on the premise of life being given to life forms that were once dead. The lunchroom scene encapsulates this aspect of the film. It does it in such an engaging fashion, where the characters featured represent two opposing sides, with each side having layers that are even rather different in a particular instance. We have the side consisting of Hammond and Gennaro, who are all for opening the park to tourists despite the ramifications. And even then, Gennaro, who was sent to inspect the park on a legal front for its safety measures, only to be won over by the miracle of the park's main attractions, which, to him, equals nothing more than money-printing machines, while Hammond wants to make things to where anyone can afford to come to the park, to be struck with wonder and awe by the dinos, with profit being icing on the metaphorical cake. Then we have the scientists, Grant, Sadler, and Malcolm, who generally disagree with the resurrection of dinosaurs for the sake of exhibition, with Malcolm fervently expressing that Hammond and his science division failed to fully grasp the gravity of the power of creation being used so haphazardly when they went through with their venture, while Sadler and Grant both state the unpredictability and potential risks and danger which may result from once extinct organisms, whether they be dinosaurs or exotic prehistoric plants, being introduced suddenly to humankind. The point of Jurassic Park is that great achievements by mankind, particularly involving the sheer powers of creation itself, must be done so delicately if they are to be done at all, because things simply will not end well if they're done recklessly and without foresight. The film also has a strong man versus nature conflict that critiques how technological advancements, if left unchecked, and if certain ramifications are to be underestimated, can lead to catastrophe. The opening sequence in the film alone, where Muldoon and a small army of workers try to simply move a velociraptor into its paddock, only for the raptor to get the drop on them and start attacking a worker, is an excellent showcase of that conflict, where no matter how much manpower one may have, and no matter how advanced our technology may be, the amount of power one must have in order to control nature may very well be unreachable, because nature, or rather life itself, will always find a way to outclass us. Even a small moment where we see the horror in Muldoon's eyes as the raptor looks right back at him while she slaughters her prey further proves this point. And honestly, there is a lot to unpack here when it comes to how thematically strong Jurassic Park is as a story. But I think what I just said here in this particular portion of the video should suffice for you all. So why don't we move on to another aspect, shall we? For you see, in order to have great storytelling, great characters are just as important of a factor, if not more so. And Jurassic Park is no exception when it comes to having great, memorable characters who bolster the story. First we have Dr. Alan Grant, a man who prefers the old-fashioned way in terms of digging up and discovering relics of the past, those being fossils, right down to questioning where the fun would be in finding fossils digitally, which stems from how he doesn't appreciate how such advancements are getting in the way of making the hard work folks like him and Sadler put into all the more worthwhile. It's proven even further when, for example, Hammond's helicopter comes in and nearly undoes all that hard work within a moment's notice. More importantly, this all stems from his love and respect for paleontology and the more natural way of making such wondrous discoveries, hence his eventual stance against bringing dinosaurs back into the world 65 million years after their extinction, which is caused by technological advancements being such oversteps that disrupt the natural order, as well as the unpredictability that may come of dinosaurs and humans suddenly being thrown into the mixing pot together, with that mixing pot being our ecosystem. Grant's also not much of a fan of kids, despite Ellie's interest in having them, which he shows in scenes such as when he scares a boy with what a velociraptor would do to him if they met him after he called the skeleton of one a 6-foot turkey, as well as later on in the film where he tries to avoid being in the same car as Lex and Tim. However, Alan finds himself becoming a protective guardian for Lex and Tim when the trio find themselves needing to traverse the island after the T-Rex breakout in order to get back to Hammond and the rest. In fact, the T-Rex sequence is the inciting incident that pushes Alan into becoming that guardian figure that Lex and Tim need at the time. In contrast to Gennaro abandoning them right before the breakout, Alan Grant, as well as Malcolm, jumps into action to try to save the kids from getting eaten. The moment he steps out of the car with that flare shows his capacity of altruism, establishing that he is willing to put his own life on the line in order to save a pair of children whom he just met. Alan also reassures Lex that he won't abandon her or her brother the way Gennaro did, and then comforts Tim by promising not to tell anyone about him vomiting in the car when they're in a tree. Despite his inexperience, not just with children but also in perilous life and death situations, he still goes above and beyond in stepping in to protect Hammond's grandkids. As their venture progresses, he's won over by them and forms a friendship with them. Recognizing that having kids isn't so bad, it even proves his capability of being a good father, especially when he tries to resuscitate Tim after he gets electrocuted. Now sure, Alan would do this for anyone considering his care for human life in general, but the particular desperation that he shows when attempting to bring Tim back really demonstrates his caring for the well-being of children, to where he's willing to stand in front of the kids and Ellie when they're cornered by a pair of raptors. By the end of the film, he has an understanding of why Ellie wants to have kids because of how worthwhile it may be to have them. It's a shame that this thread was never followed up on properly by future sequels, though. That being said, not even the waste of such potential can take away how well executed Alan Grant's character arc is within the bubble that is this film. And of course, Sam Neill does an excellent job playing this character throughout the film. Whether it's to convey a sense of discomfort / mild contempt to an amusing degree, or to convey a sense of shock and awe, the man simply crushes it here to where he will always be Dr. Alan Grant to me. And to many others, I'm sure. Next, we have Ellie Sattler, the paleobotanist who is also Alan Grant's partner, both romantically and in the field, played by Laura Dern, who also does a great job here. While she doesn't go through the most dynamic of development in the film, Ellie Sattler starts out, much like Grant and Malcolm, as being enraptured by the pure majesty of dinosaurs having been brought back into the world. However, she still sits on the same side as Grant and Malcolm when it dawns on the three of them of the unorthodox nature of how the prehistoric life forms are brought back, as well as how they're being maintained, such as when Henry Wu, played by B.D. Wong, explains that the dinos are denied of having any sort of sexual variation, in that all the dinos are modified to be female despite the likelihood of their ability to alter the genetic coding in order to become male in a single-sex environment. Ellie also goes on to push Hammond into being more rational after he's lost control of everything in the park, to where she reminds him of the danger that Grant, Lex, and Tim are currently in. So the relief she expresses when she's reunited with Alan, as well as when they're all off the island later on, is very palpable. To put things simply, Ellie Sattler isn't the deepest character of the bunch, but she still works overall nonetheless. Now on to our third subject, Dr. Ian Malcolm, who steals the whole show, as demonstrated not just by Goldblum's ultramagnetic charisma, which you can never go wrong with, but also by the character giving some of the most significant amount of credence to the film's thematic core. Like Grant and Sattler, Malcolm is amazed by the miracle of life in the form of dinos walking the earth again. However, this doesn't take long for him to become the first to question and even condemn what Hammond and InGen have done, stating how a form of godlike power was achieved without any level of discipline on how to responsibly wield that godhood, or any consideration of whether or not it should be wielded at all. He even goes as far as to describe the act of resurrecting extinct life forms for the sake of mere exhibition as, and I quote, rape of the natural order. That being said, Malcolm displays a very high level charm, almost a laid back nature, to coincide with the great level intellect that he also displays, especially when it comes to women. Having been married and divorced with a few different women, and while being the father of 3 kids that have come from separate marriages, he flirts with and has some good rapport with Ellie Sattler, such as when he explains to her about chaos theory. But he's still respectful enough to know when to back off, such as when he asks Alan if Ellie is seeing anyone. Considering that he's a father himself, Malcolm is the first to show concern for Lex and Tim being scared by the power outage and torrential storm, and this is even before the T-Rex starts showing up. Once the T-Rex begins her breakout and starts attacking the children, Malcolm steps out of the car with a flare right after Alan in order to distract the dino. Even though he puts himself in grave danger by letting Rexy chase after him, and even after Alan had already thrown the flare into the paddock to try to get her away from the kids, Malcolm was still noble enough to try to distract her long enough for Alan to get the kids out. Perhaps not the smartest decision in hindsight, but heroic all the same, and it makes sense for who he is as a character. While he does end up being injured to the point of being immobile as a result, Malcolm still becomes a key player in helping the remaining folks who are with him in rebooting the island's power and saving their skins. Once it is all said and done, Malcolm's words of how life finds a way are proven correct, and boy howdy are they proven correct in such a well-executed and highly entertaining fashion. So there's quite a bit of good to be said about the big 3 here, as in the big 3 who would go on to be the most prominent of recurring characters from the original film, whom we see throughout the Jurassic saga. But let's not forget about the character who undergoes the most significant amount of development in Jurassic Park, John Hammond. Not only does Richard Attenborough give a fantastic and nuanced performance, but the character Hammond himself undergoes a very strong arc where he is forced to realize that this dream he has, which has gestated since his childhood, is simply unreachable due to the lack of control he really has. He starts out as showing a great deal of pride in what he's accomplished, and wishes to bring something to the world that would astound and amaze it. However, Hammond was so overtaken by his dream that he wasn't able to properly prepare for what could possibly go wrong, whether it's dinosaurs not appearing for the demonstration tour, or his guests of honor speaking about his park in not the best light, or power going out at the worst possible moment. While it hurts him deep down knowing that his dream can never be achieved the way he envisioned it, after his talk with Sattler in the dining hall, Hammond still accepts the reality of the situation due to the cost of human life that has come as a result, especially when a part of that human life that's at stake is his own grandchildren. So he pushes forward to help Sattler and company in getting the park's power back up and running, and in getting the remainder of his guests, those being Sattler, Grant, Tim, Lex, and Malcolm, off the island once his helicopter arrives. Despite his sadness in leaving his dream behind, Hammond goes forward all the same in the name of preserving the things that really matter, those being the people he loves. Now, I do understand that, much like many other aspects of the film, John Hammond's portrayal here isn't how he was done in Michael Crichton's original novel, where he was depicted as, one may put it, much less of a positive role model. And sure, perhaps the Jurassic Park that we got, that has become one of the most iconic works of cinema of all time, is a loose adaptation of its original counterpart. And perhaps it would be rather interesting to see how a more strict adaptation of Crichton's novel would turn out. However, that doesn't change how wonderfully crafted the film that we ended up getting truly is. And suffice it to say, the film's portrayal of John Hammond is extremely well done, no matter how accurate or inaccurate it may be from the novel. Because what we have here works extremely well with the story that we actually are getting here, that we are actually being told here. While Jurassic Park has some excellently done primary characters, the side characters are also very well done. Lex and Tim, the grandchildren of John Hammond, appear much later into the film than most of the significant characters in the film. They're set up as having a mother who is undergoing a divorce, as established through dialogue in the beginning of the film, so them visiting the grandpa at his park was meant to be not much more than a fun little weekend getaway. As the film progresses, however, that fun day at Grandpa's theme park becomes a nightmare for Tim and Lex when they find themselves trying to narrowly escape a variety of dangers on the island. From a T-Rex on the hunt, to an electrical fence powering back on, unbeknownst to Sattler, to a pair of velociraptors, while being watched over by Dr. Alan Grant. The kids serve as a great foil for Alan as they go on to endear him, as well as us as an audience, into liking them throughout their journey despite his initial disinterest towards kids in general. Next we have Donald Gennaro, the lawyer. He's been sent by John Hammond's benefactors to inspect the park's safety capabilities in light of a worker being killed during the film's opening scene. As soon as he lays eyes on that brachiosaurus that first shows up, however, Gennaro's tune drastically changes as he is overwhelmed by Jurassic Park's potential for making money, to where his positive outlook on the park is contradictory to even Hammond's more earnest reasoning for building the place. While it's fair to see why he would have this mindset, considering how money makes the world go round and such, Gennaro is still shown to be in the wrong mindset because of how narrow it is once we consider the ethics of bringing back once extinct life forms for profit. Then once the power goes out in the middle of the tour and when the Tyrannosaurus Rex first appears, Gennaro cowers off and leaves Lex and Tim in the car to hide in a nearby bathroom. Considering that he left the kids to potentially die instead of staying to keep them safe, once Rexy breaks down those barriers, it's almost a form of karma when Gennaro gets the good old chompy chomp. Not much else to say about him, except how he, amongst many other characters, helped bolster the film's thematic core, so moving on. Next character on the docket is Robert Muldoon, who is portrayed as the most cautious of the threat dinosaurs pose, especially the velociraptors, whom he experienced firsthand before things go completely to hell. From the opening scene alone, which features a raptor attack resulting in the horrific and unfortunate killing of a worker, we understand Muldoon's perspective right away, as dinosaurs are beings which must be respected as well as feared, especially the more clever ones, which makes his death by the jaws of a raptor all the more horrific as well as a shame due to the fact of him being the most well-equipped and trained for dealing with the threat of dinos on the loose. Even as someone who understands these dinos firsthand better than anyone, Muldoon still can't overcome how truly deadly the raptors are, not just by their speed and strength, but also by their sheer intelligence, to where he shows a bit of respect for them right until his gruesome end. So then that leaves us with Dennis Nedry, the IT guy whose actions are the result of Hammond not properly taking the utmost precautions, even if it literally meant sparing no expense, as he often proclaims. Being underpaid and having too much on his plate in terms of responsibilities prompts Nedry to turn to Lewis Dodson. Dodson, we got Dodson here! Sorry, I couldn't help myself there. Anyways, Dodson is the member of a rival company who gives Nedry the task to steal dinosaur embryos from under Hammond's nose in order to give this rival company an edge over InGen. Despite working for someone else, Nedry serves as the primary human antagonist because his actions of shutting down the park in order to enact his heist would result in the mayhem which we see from then on. Nedry represents the worst of mankind, underestimating the power of nature for his own self-interest. Granted, he's not stupid since he uses the cover of the park's power cutting off, temporarily as he may put it, in order to make his heist and escape happen, and he even has enough foresight to keep power for the raptor paddock on, due to how especially dangerous they are in comparison to the rest of the park's assets, but he's still prone to go through several hitches which he finds himself in. While we do understand, albeit to a small degree, the circumstances of why he goes down this path, the film, and by extension we the audience, still ultimately condemn him because his heist led to people being put in grave danger and even some people being killed as a result of him cutting the power off. And so, Nedry gets his comeuppance when, thanks to the stormy weather, he gets himself lost after accidentally smashing into a sign that was meant to lead him to the docks, which then leads to him getting his jeep stuck, followed by an encounter with a Dilophosaurus, which not only kills him, but also causes him to lose that Barbasol can full of valuable embryos, rendering his efforts completely in vain. Oh, and of course, Dennis Nedry is an absolute meme machine in the best ways imaginable because of the sheer amount of entertainment value that his dialogue and mannerisms exhibit. Well, we've spent a lot of time on the human cast in Jurassic Park, which consists of such great, well-rounded characters, so now let's get into gushing about a different aspect of the film, shall we? Now, considering that this is a monster movie of sorts, and monster movies are the name of the game here at Sea Monster Park, I have to talk about the dinosaurs. Not so much the technical fidelity of how the effects for them are done, that comes next, What I mean is how the dinos are portrayed as characters, or at least such as they are characters. The dinosaurs are basically portrayed as animals, just doing what they do, as if they never went extinct in the first place, whether it's a herd of brachiosaurs peacefully walking through the plains, or taking bites from tree tops, and even bellowing to each other like humpback whales, or a Dilophosaurus showing up to Nedry, curiously inspecting him and stalking him before going for the attack. The closest and perhaps most obvious example of anthropomorphism in dinosaurs in this film is when a velociraptor is leering at Tim and Lex running away in the kitchen. But for the most part, the dinos are more animalistic than anything. Not to mention the build-up to when we next see a dinosaur on screen is palpable and expertly executed to where it adds to the suspense of seeing what we as an audience are in for. Whether it's building up to the first sight of a dinosaur of pure beauty and majesty like a brachiosaurus, or building up to the appearance of the more scary kind, like the T-Rex and the raptors. In fact, the velociraptors get the most amount of build-up out of every dino due to a brief glimpse we get of one during the opening scene, and how certain characters like Grant and Muldoon talk about how horrifying a raptor encounter may be in terms of how they slay their prey as well as how they learn and strategize, which makes the first instance of a raptor finally appearing on screen and in person and in clear view all the more effective as a payoff. The mere description of velociraptors and the behavior alone makes the dino frightening enough as far as movie monsters are concerned, which puts us as an audience even more on edge when we see our human characters such as Tim and Lex being hunted by them in the kitchen, as well as when we see the results of raptors having caught their prey, such as when we see the dismembered arm of a now dead Ray Arnold. Even the sounds of raptors tearing a cow apart allows us to only use our imagination of the horrors that would come during a raptor attack, thus setting us up to fear for anyone who could cross paths with such dangerous creatures. Not to mention, as a side note, the Dilophosaurus also gets a similar treatment in that it is verbally described in what it is capable of doing, such as spitting venom out in order to shock and paralyze its victims before going in for the kill, which makes its actual proper appearance when it goes after Nedry all the more worthwhile of a payoff. Then there's the build-up for when we see the other big prehistoric star of the film, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. During the ill-fated tour, the audience, both in universe and in the meta, are waiting for another dino to show up only for them to be no-shows. First the Dilophosaurus, then the T-Rex. The folks in the control room even try to offer up a goat as food for Rexy just to draw her out, but still, nothing. While all the characters express varying degrees of disappointment, we, the viewers, are still deeply involved in terms of waiting for the shoe to drop, and we're amused by and even understanding how the characters are receiving the park's exhibits, or lack thereof in this case. Once the tour is cut short due to the incoming storm, and once Nedry sabotages the park by shutting its power off, the T-Rex sequence comes in at full swing. This sequence is not only a visual wonder, from the amazing animatronics done by the great Stan Winston to the sparing use of CGI that's implemented really well with a dark, stormy setting, but it's also a masterclass in how to create a suspenseful and exhilarating set piece. From the vibrations of Rexy's footsteps in a cup of water, to a grand entrance, or grand exit from her paddock in this case, to Rexy tearing Lex and Tim's car apart in order to eat them, we get the sense of scale of this terrifying dino, and we get her behaving naturally and realistically like an animal inspecting what is a foreign object to her while she's on the hunt, and the suspense and intensity goes above and beyond it being palpable considering the endearing characters who find themselves caught in the middle. Basically, the film does an expert job at building up to when we get to see the carnivorous dinos. Now, even with the horror elements of the dinos being taken into account, the film never loses sight to include scenes of pure beauty and wonder, such as when we see the brachiosaurs or sick triceratops, which, even though they weren't supposed to be brought back, there's still something about them being back that's so awe-inspiring. Something about seeing animals that were once extinct now walking the earth again. That's an absolute wonder to behold, and the film fully capitalizes on how the characters would react to it, such as Alan Grant, who spent his whole life studying dinosaurs, now getting to bear witness to his life's passion walking right in front of him, and he finds himself nearly speechless. Jurassic Park does a fantastic job at balancing the wonder of dinos having been brought back with the horror of such an idea and transitioning from one tone to the next and back throughout its runtime, sometimes even within the same scene, whether it's the Gallimimus sequence or in the scene with the baby raptor hatching from her egg, which starts out as a scene of wonderment of seeing a dinosaur being born, only to end on a more ominous note when Alan Grant is told that the baby dino that's in his hands is a velociraptor. Case in point, perfectly balanced, as all things should be, one may put it. So, we've talked about the film's story, its characters, its thematic foundation, its dinosaurs, and even touched on some of its thrilling set pieces, which means it's time to discuss the visual work in Jurassic Park. And well, what can I really say about them that hasn't been said already many times before, or won't be said many times going forward? They are absolutely astonishing. For a 30-year-old film, the effects on the dinosaurs are still some of the best that any fan of cinema, or even a fan of dinosaurs, could ask for. Even with the sequels that would come many years later, the technical fidelity in the original Jurassic Park, and how Steven Spielberg and company managed to execute them so well, is simply unmatched. The only Jurassic sequel that could potentially rival it would be The Lost World, which Spielberg also directed, but even then, the first movie is still something to behold when it comes to how its visual work is done. Heck, for as far as we've come in terms of what CGI can do in cinema, most films these days can't even come close to measuring up to the exquisite craftsmanship that is on display in Jurassic Park. Not to say that we haven't had films which featured marvelous visual work post-1993, but let's be real here, without Jurassic Park, we would be missing out on a lot of the best that CGI is capable of. Given how CGI was still in its infancy in terms of what it could potentially do back in 1993, the folks behind this film expertly implemented CGI in all the right places while knowing how to make any transition from practical effects to CGI in a way that's pretty much seamless. Such as during one shot where we at first see an animatronic T-Rex head, only for the camera to pan forward in Grant and Malcolm's car to show a CG render of the T-Rex having its attention drawn by Tim and Lex. Heck, as a side note, the cinematography in general is great with a lot of tracking shots that go for a decent length, especially to establish certain settings. Not to mention, it also helps that lighting and weather effects help in concealing whatever imperfections that may be detectable. The same can be said about other CG-oriented scenes, such as the Brachiosaurus scene, the Gallimimus scene, the chase throughout the visitor center, and the T-Rex's final scene with the raptors. There's also a great sense of how deliberate certain scenes involving the dinos are done in terms of only seeing what needs to be shown and only using CGI when there's no other choice but to do so, such as during the kitchen sequence, where the film switches from showing the two raptors in full as CG characters, well-rendered ones I might add, to only showing a raptor's head and tail or a raptor's set of feet, which are all practical. Spielberg and his crew understood the technical limitations that they had to work with, and with those in mind, they were able to really knock this scene, among the others, out of the park, no pun intended, on a visual level. Now, for all the gushing which I may do for this movie's visuals and its set pieces, they're not all 100% perfection. Sure, I could point out a random hand on the Velociraptor's tail when it first enters the kitchen, or a string being somewhat visible on the Dilophosaurus when its frills come up, and while those little errors are present, they're still pretty much just blink and you'll miss moments at the end of the day. I'm even willing to admit in saying that the CGI for Rexy when she's pursuing Sattler, Malcolm, and Muldoon is a bit spotty in some moments. Not terrible given the time period and given how even those moments don't linger for too long, but still not quite as spot on or good as what we've seen before or will go on to see afterwards. However, there are still some flaws / errors that are a little more impactful in how the set pieces play out. For example, and this is perhaps the most notable example, the T-Rex paddock's geographical layout suddenly changes from when the T-Rex gets out to when Alan and Lex are forced to scale down into said paddock. In that the layout goes from the elevation between the road and the paddock being close to equal, if not all equal, to the elevation of the ground in the paddock being high enough for Alan and Lex to scale down into it and for the car that Tim is trapped in to fall into a treetop. If the geography wasn't altered mid-scene, either the T-Rex would be able to get out, but we wouldn't get Alan and Lex perilously scaling down into the paddock and the car going into the treetop to lead to a later set piece, or we wouldn't get the T-Rex being able to break out of its paddock whatsoever due to the elevation being too high. So there's that. Another example is during the last part of the climax where the T-Rex is suddenly able to sneak up on the raptors and kill one of them for dramatic effect. It especially becomes more questionable when earlier in the film the T-Rex is established to cause impact tremors with every footstep, with each footstep being pretty loud and booming, I might add, thus signaling her presence/arrival. Sure, the scene would very easily have played out with little to no difference if the T-Rex showed up with its footsteps being heard and acknowledged by the people as well as the raptors, but it's still kinda odd that Rexy was able to get the drop on these raptors by simply defying the reality of her not being able to possibly do so because the filmmakers wanted this moment. I want to reiterate that these sequences are great and highly satisfying in terms of spectacle, and these errors aren't enough to take away from how well crafted they are overall, but they're still there and are still worth addressing when we assess the objective quality of the film's set pieces. So it should be pretty telling how minor these issues are in comparison to how they just barely even make a scratch on the film's very strong quality. Which reminds me, basically, at this point, it's safe to conclude that Jurassic Park is a cinematic marvel. And if you were to ask me, that is rather conservative in terms of compliments. The effects, despite a few flubs that are worth noting but not enough to tank the film by any means, are beyond words in terms of ingenuity, fidelity, timelessness, and, well, sheer awesomeness. The set pieces which these visuals complement are also amazingly crafted with a great deal of suspense, intensity, and excitement. The cast is wonderful through and through, while the characters they play are very endearing, likable, well-defined, understandable, memorable. Whatever positive blurb you want to give them will very likely apply. Heck, I'll even count the dinos as characters if you want, and we can describe them as awe-inspiring, beautiful, and/or scary for good measure. And the story is very well executed and features a very strong thematic core that's bolstered by dialogue, character moments, and a system of cause and effect that all remain congruent from beginning to end, even with a few noticeable, albeit minor, issues that are sparsely present. The film is also very tight in terms of its writing, getting across all that it needs to, as well as going above and beyond and delivering on its promises of potential in its premise, leaving no fat to be trimmed/streamlined, or any element needing further elaboration/development, thus giving us a 2-hour film that never wastes even a second and manages to deliver on a more than satisfying experience. Jurassic Park stands as not only one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, but it is also one of the best films ever made. And there's only oh so few movies out there which I can give this high of an honor to. So, in other words, this movie rules. And that just about does it for my essay video on Jurassic Park. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching and joining me in celebrating this film's anniversary. Now, considering that I did a video on the original Jurassic Park, it's understandable to suspect that I'll be doing an essay video or even an essay video series on the rest of the Jurassic saga. And I can safely say that I'll likely be doing exactly that in the future. Maybe not in the near future, but I'm certainly keen on the prospect of doing a video or a string of videos on the sequels going forward. So keep an eye out for anything regarding that prospect. In fact, having done this video, I've also opened the door to doing videos on other dinosaur-themed films, not just films in the Jurassic Park franchise. So again, keep an eye out for news regarding that. For now, though, I feel pretty content in having done this video for the time being. Now, with all that said, I hope you all found this essay video to be worth a watch, and I hope it has encouraged you all to check out the rest of my content, as well as follow me for any future content. Once again, I thank you all for watching, and until my next video or series of videos, I will see you all later.